In Bomber Command, the average life expectancy was 5. I managed to survive until my 17th. I was shot down at my 17th.
It was rare to finish 10 missions. If you got 10 missions in, you'd already beat the odds of surviving.
We finished 13 missions. We're on our 14th mission the day we were shot down.
17% of those shot down survived. 83% were killed. So I'm very, very fortunate.
I was hit in the left wing between number 1 and number 2 engine by a direct burst, flak, 88 or 105, I don't know which, but it knocked a big hole in my wing, and there was fire, and the aluminum skin on the airplane was melting and curling, so I knew we'd had it. So I was on intercom also, bail out, we've had it. And they started leaving that airplane. And all of us got out.
I felt that if I could somehow catch a freight train going west and get into France or Belgium and somehow contact the underground to get back to Britain. But getting out of Germany was well nigh impossible. Every crossing, every bridge was guarded.
And we finally made it to the underground headquarters in Paris, and something was wrong. I felt it. Now, I was shot down July 8th. July 11th, at night, we were supposed to go out to this area and catch an airplane that was going to fly us back to England. So we had these 2 trucks, and here now there were 26 Allied airmen total that were already waiting to fly back to England. So I was in the rear truck, and Chat was pretty close to him, and we pulled out of the headquarters there, underground headquarters, and about 10 minutes later, I see a car pull in behind us, and I could see machine guns. Another car pulled in behind them, and I told Chat, I said, Chat, it don't look good at all. They opened the gates, they pulled in, searchlights, and I've never seen so many guns and searchlights pointed. Amerikaners, Englanders, Rausschmidt, hands up. I couldn't reach high enough in the sky.
We crashed, and the top turret came down, and the top turret caught the nose gunner and my feet. All 4 were broken, and we were trapped in the plane, and the other 2 were trapped in the plane also. The navigator and the flight engineer that were on the deck. They weren't hurt, they just couldn't get out of the plane. But the plane had broken open, and the pilot and the co-pilot were able to just get out of the opening, you know. The first thing that happened was it attracted a big crowd. They ran them into town, which was only about maybe 200 or 300 yards away. They ran them to the Muir Hotel, put them up against the wall, and there were 2 SS officers that were in town on leave. And they're even inciting the crowd even more because they wanted to hang everybody, okay? They scared them to death. I didn't experience that because I'm trapped in the plane. So about that time, a Wehrmacht officer, and I've written him a letter, and I thanked him for saving our lives. But anyhow, he saw our plane come over, and he gathered up some of his troops and put them in a truck. It's a small town, and got out to the field. And then he had a big argument with the 2 SS officers as to who had jurisdiction, and somehow he convinced them that because they were on leave and he was on duty, and of course he had the soldiers too, he took them all prisoner. It's funny when you get in a position like that. I guess it's the first time in your life that you realize that you have absolutely no control at all on anything that's going to happen. So it's just a matter of what's going to happen. You don't have any hopes. You don't. I mean, you're just numb. You're scared, and that. But it's a feeling of just complete helplessness as to what is the next step going to be.
Well, the first time, it sort of shakes you up to watch. I can sit here and put that tape in there, watch myself being shot down, watch myself being marched off to POW camp. It's the whole crew's there. Well, not the whole. We're two of them. We're two. The tail gunner and the ball turret gunner were killed, but the rest of us were all there.
And then you start going through the process. We went to Peenaburg, which was an interrogation center. It was probably almost one of the last times I saw all of the crew. They put everybody on in a separate room with straw on the floor. It's the typical thing that you see on TV, And they just leave you there for about 3 or 4 days. Don't just put some food underneath the door. Don't talk to you. Don't do nothing.
All of us were put in individual cells in the basement of a building. First thing was to find some way to keep from losing track of time. So I ripped the lining, because there's a lining inside that jacket. I ripped the lining along the bottom and took the jacket and laid it down on a hard surface and drew a calendar for the month of September. Okay, because I knew what days it were and the dates. So I made a calendar for 1943 of the month of September. And then I marked it off as each day went by to keep track of time. And if you don't do something, you have no idea. I mean, you have no reference to anything. Nothing. Absolute blank.
And then they bring you out, and then they ask you questions about the 448th, and they act like they know everything, which they did know. They knew the name of the chef, which I didn't even know his name, But it was a technique that they used to use to get you in a position which you thought they knew everything, so if you said anything that would not make any difference in that.
And they took me to a room, and they started beating me up pretty bad with some hard rubber hoses. And the Gestapo agent that was interviewing me told me after I was pretty bad shape, he said, "For you, not only the war is over, your life is over. We're going to execute you in 2 days by a firing squad. They're going to shoot me in 2 days."
I was in a dungeon, and I don't know how many days or nights it was. And of course, they kept you in complete isolation to make you want to talk. So this guy came in, and he was interrogating me, and he says, we know something about you, and he told me what he knew, and of course it was more than I knew. And then he says, I want you to confirm all of this. And I says, my name, rank, and serial number is such and such and such and such. And this went on for a while, and he said, well, we'll have to shoot you in the morning because there's an area here that is blank in your portfolio, and we're sure you went to spy school during this period, so we're going to shoot you in the morning. And they marched me out with about 6 or 7 other guys and shot one of them, and then marched us back into the thing. He says, well, we'll let you off today, but we'll shoot you tomorrow. And this went on till all of those other guys had been shot. And he shot all of them. I was the last one, so the next day I knew I was dead. But he didn't shoot me. They transferred me then to the regular POW camp at Stalag 3. And this happened a lot at Dulag.
And finally we arrived at a place called Buchenwald concentration camp. When I walked into that camp and saw what my eyes were seeing, I couldn't believe it. People in striped uniforms, already skin and bones, they were staring but not seeing because they were starving to death. It was a slave labor camp. Surrounding Buchenwald was 4 factories that made component parts for the V1s and V2s, but they used the slave labor to build those things. I wanted to resign from the human race for what I was witnessing there. But they put us out in the open, no shelter, 168 of us. We had 32 torn, worn blankets for us to live out on the rocks. No shoes, striped uniforms. And they started giving us one little watery soup per day to live on. It was absolutely uncanny to see what I saw there. Little children was in a compound next to us. And the chimney from the crematorium was going night and day, belching smoke and ash from burning corpses. The little children started disappearing. Now, I didn't see them actually being killed or burned in the crematorium, but they all disappeared. While we were there, we didn't see this either, but they killed 8,000 Russian soldiers, burned them in the crematorium, and the Polish, the gypsies, the political prisoners, anyone that was against the Third Reich was concentration camp bound. Bernard Scharf, my waist gunner on my crew, could speak fluent German. So I told him, I said, Bernard, anytime you see a uniform, you yell out that we are Allied airmen and demand to be treated under the Geneva Convention. He did that. Field Marshal Hermann Göring of the Luftwaffe learned that Allied airman was in Buchenwald, and they said he turned livid and sent 2 of his high-ranking officers to Buchenwald to take us out finally to a prisoner of war camp. It was like going from hell to heaven. Going from a concentration camp to a prisoner of war camp was like a spa, a resort in comparison. We had hot water for showers. We had shaving equipment. We had toothbrush, toothpaste. We had Red Cross parcels, American, British, Canadian, Australian. And in each American Red Cross parcel, there was a carton of cigarettes. So then I knew everything was going to be all right. We could laugh and talk with the Luftwaffe officers, but we couldn't, the Gestapo and SS, barbaric brutality. I tell you something, it was hell. Literally, I've been to hell. I don't want to go back.
It's almost a feeling of relief because in a way you're a lot safer than the outside. Things are very controlled there. You're under military control, but there were strict laws. If you went over the white line, they'd shoot you from the tower. They ain't going to screw around, you know. Or if there was any infraction in that, you would pay the penalty for that. Other than that, most of it was the hardship of prison camp itself. For example, there was no medical. I took the casts off myself one day. I'm 19 years old. Why am I going to screw around, you know? So I just took the casts, took them on off. The other thing was sanitary. They used to turn the water on 15 minutes a day, and that for showers and that for 10,000. So the wind-up is, you know, you're covered with lice and, you know. And I was put in a barracks, and there weren't any beds left. So I shared the floor with another guy, and we shared one blanket together.
We kept track of the Germans as they came in the camp, and of course we were working on a lot of things like passports, papers to escape with. We were working on all escape activities. And if they got near where they were forging Army papers, German Army papers and things like that, we had to get them shut down. So we had systems where we'd close the shutter and they would immediately hide all of their equipment and know that the German was coming. If you volunteered, they gave you a job and you did it.
You had some making maps and
oh gosh, yes.
all
People that
kinds
had talent and they could
birth certificates,
copy
and
birth certificates and Army papers and passports and everything. We had a whole section that were really good at these darn papers, and that's the ones we guarded very carefully because they shot you if they caught you doing that.
I built a crystal radio set in POW camp. I was able to bribe a German guard to bring me in a piece of crystal and an earphone out of a telephone with cigarettes. So at night, after everybody went to bed, I used to sneak out on the outside of the barracks and open up this watt-hour meter, and I took it apart. I got the coils out of it. So once a month, detailed in our barracks, GI, and I did it myself many times, had other people do it, go out, open up the case, and turn the dials up. So, and we did that religiously, okay? The Germans never caught on, but I had the wire I needed to make coils, to make a tune circuit, to make a crystal radio set. But BBC was a powerful transmitter. Used to pick up the news from BBC, and they specifically, both in ABC and BBC, directed these newscasts to the POWs. So, you know, they did it on purpose by design because they knew we were receiving the messages. And they could send a message to us very easily. We knew more about what was going on than what the Germans did. We made a map and put it in our barracks. And the German guards used to come down and look at it, see how the war was going.
we have to thank two organizations. One of them was the International Red Cross, which supplied us with food parcels. The other was the International YMCA, which supplied us with sports equipment, musical instruments, playing cards, all kinds of things to occupy your time with. And I think each of the camps at one time or another used one of the barracks and created a kind of small theater out of it, complete with a stage and whatnot. We had to do something to entertain ourselves.
They had shows in our camp too. Yeah. They had a group that offered a production, and we had several of the guys that could talk like girls, and they dressed up like girls, and it was a regular show.
We had a really fine stage band.
Right.
We did in the center camp.
We set up classes. We actually ran, and we got credit. Some POWs could get college credit for the classes that they took in POW camp.
That's why I consider it my alma mater, because we gave courses and we had experts on any subject you could think of. Particularly with the European Air Forces, because with North American, we tended to be just high school kids or bank clerks or straight off the farm sort of thing. The Europeans were older, and some of them had PhDs, some were professionals. We had, for instance, we had top people from some of the leading UK orchestras and bands. So we built our own bands, and we had wonderful music there.
We were fed the black bread. This is bread that was made between the wars and stored underground. It was as hard as a rock. Now some of the bread which we got, on the bottom of it, when they baked the bread, there was a stamp that was put on there, which was the year that the bread was made. And we got bread. I've eaten bread it was baked in 1927. And the outside of it is as hard as a brick. You could take a nail and take a loaf of bread and drive a nail in the wood.
But you had that black bread, and they never put the bread in bake or anything, just loaves of bread and sawdust in it. Baked it with sawdust, and they just stack it on the trucks, you know, but we survived.
Nuremberg was very rough. No Red Cross food, no breakfast. For lunch, we had 1 tin among every 5 prisoners, and they'd come in with soup made from dehydrated peas, and 1 ladle of soup per person. And in your soup, don't look into it, because there'd be at least 30 dead weevils floating around in it. But the weevils were the only meat we ever saw, so down the hatch along with the peas. And that was all we had for lunch. For supper, we got 4 very thin slices of black bread that was half sawdust and 2 rotten potatoes. But we ate the potatoes, skin, dirt, and all.
All you ever talked about was food, 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 food. I mean, I've written down some recipes that some guys would write down recipes of how the mother made this and how the mother made that. And then that's what you talk about, getting out and getting food. That was all you thought about.
The main thing was food. I mean, you just get obsessed with, you just can't think of everything. They used to have a line and a big pot of barley soup. It was almost always just barley soup. And sometimes they put a little horse meat in it if a horse got killed in the fields or something like that. But you put your can on this scale, and then they take it, and no one got any more or any less. It was, I mean, food would just add a premium.
We had received American Red Cross parcels that had been shipped into Germany through the International Red Cross through Switzerland. And typically we got 1 Red Cross parcel per person per week. Okay. And it had 11 pounds of food in it, 11 pounds of substance. That included, we had coffee, we had sugar, we had powdered milk, we had liverwurst, we had cereal, so on and so forth. And then we got soap, we got cigarettes in the parcel.
Then every once in a while we'd get a Red Cross package if the Germans weren't eating them. They were eating them because they were out of food too. They really were. And I think the Red Cross package actually wound up saving our lives, because we couldn't sustain 680 calories a day.
The Germans didn't furnish us enough to live on. My weight, I was 185 when I went into camp. I came out at 115.
Well, you were there longer than I was.
Yeah.
I started out about 162 or somewhere around there, and then when I finished, I was around 118 or 19.
Yeah. And you didn't get a lot of weight added in the camp.
No.
Even the people that were plump,
They wound up skinny.
they wound up skinny. Right.
Yeah, it was approximately 150, and I was 80 pounds when I got it back.
So you almost lost half your weight.
You can figure a guy is 6 foot, 180 pounds, he comes back in 100 pounds, you know, and then they're just skin and bone.
After 4 months, I'd lost half my body weight. I weighed 188 when I was shot down. I think I came out of there weighing less than 100. My legs look something like my arms now, probably. I couldn't walk.
We had a story in POW camp. You can tell how long a POW has been in camp, in prison, by how he eats. Okay? They serve you a cup of soup. And the first 6 months you're there, you look at it and push it back. Just won't eat it. It's putrid. Second 6 months you're there, they serve you a bowl of soup. And you reach in, pick out all the bugs, bird beaks, toenails, feathers, and eat the rest of it. Third 6 months you're there, you take it and just eat it. The fourth 6 months you're there, one of those bugs tried to get away, you reach out and get him and put him back in. And that's about the way it was.
They transferred us out, and we all cried because we'd been working on those tunnels, and they transferred us out about 3 weeks before the one tunnel broke. It was mainly the Brits that got out, and the only Americans that were in the escape were the ones that were in the RAF. And there were quite a few in the RAF, you know. Mm-hmm. They went over early and joined.
Which one was the great escaping, Tom, Dick, or Harry?
Harry.
Harry.
Tom and Dick had been found. And they broke Harry.
Yeah.
And that was the words we used for the tunnels. We'd say, "How's Harry today?" And that'd give the condition of the tunnel.
It would take 10 months to build a tunnel. We built 4. Well, first off, we had to have a trap, and there was a cement base for the stove. So we would cut a hole through the cement base. We managed to steal some cement that German workers in the compound doing legitimate work left, and we stole a lot of things. Electric wire, coils of wire, and this sort of stuff. We would have to cut this trap and start digging down, but the Germans, they had a manpower shortage too, and unlike the Great Escape, there were very few Germans in the compound at any one time, maybe 4 at most. We kept an eye on and kept a log on all of the Germans in the compound, so we knew when we could and could not engage in escape activities. But we had to be prepared to immediately reset that cement block over the tunnel and re-cement it in and dirty it up to make sure that it looked as though there was no crack there. This had to be well organized. We had to have people all over the compound that could pass signals as to where any German was at any particular time.
One of the things that people don't understand about the tunnels was the fact that they had to have something to put over the tunnel head and the sides to keep the dirt from just falling in all the time.
It was very collapsible. and you had to have timber, and you had to take all the bed boards. I started out with about 8 bed boards, and when I got through, I was sleeping on 3. And in between. That's right.
And one night, the guy on the top bunk crashed through to the guy on the second back bunk, and both of them ended up on me, and I had bruises for weeks after that.
130 yards.
Something like that, yeah. Good length.
Good long length. The biggest problem was disposing of the diggings of the tunnel. And the Great Escape showed how they did it. They put the bags down their trousers and pulled them and worked them into gardens and all kinds of things. We marched and we did everything to get rid of that darn dirt, because that white sand showed up mighty good.
We had hoped to get over 200 out. That was the plan. Of the 77 that got out, all were recaptured within days, except for the 3 that did get back. And the 3 that got back to Britain, 1 Dutchman and 2 Norwegians who were flying in the Royal Air Force. But they spoke perfect German. And of course we had forged perfect papers for them. Those who were recaptured by the Luftwaffe simply were brought back to our camp and underwent the normal punishment for escaping, which was 2 weeks of solitary confinement on a bowl of sauerkraut per day, which was, you know, it was worth getting outside the barbed wire for a few hours. 2 weeks of solitary confinement, we could take in our stride. But those who were captured by the SS and Gestapo, in fact, Hitler ordered all 77 to be shot. And Goring said, "You can't do that." He said, "What about our prisoners in Canada and Britain and the United States?" And Hitler said, "Well, over 50% have to be shot." And that's why the Gestapo and SS selected 50 to shoot, which they did.
Every prisoner had an allotment of 2 letters and 2 cards. And they would come depending on how things were going. You know, sometimes it would take 6 months for a letter to come through. Sometimes it would take only 2 or 3 months. In the weeks that I had the midnight shift and the swing shift, I would be sitting on the doorstep of the house waiting for the mailman morning and evening. And every now and then, or afternoon, and it was always so nice. You knew your mailman. And I could tell a block away if he had finally a letter, because he'd look and there'd be, his step would be lighter and he'd smile and he'd hand us over, and it was so nice. But later on he said, "I always felt so guilty when I saw you sitting on those steps and I knew I didn't have anything." But every month or so there would be something.
My family got a message. They got a message that I was a POW, okay? So that was, no, I was, at least I was alive. Okay. Well, later on, they got a message through the International Red Cross that I may have been killed trying to escape from POW camp. Okay, so this message went back. And my folks were not, did not know that I was still alive until they got the first letter from me, which was dated after the message that they got that I may have been killed, okay? So then they knew that I was, and then they received several, these letters from me that I'd written.
The interesting thing about this, and I think it was true of many POWs besides my father, he didn't write about how bad the conditions were, or that he was wounded, or that he was being mistreated. He wrote about what he wanted to eat when he got home. And he repeated the same thing over and over and over. Waffles with maple syrup, lots of butter, and some bacon and eggs. And in one of the letters he even said, "Don't worry if you forget. I've got a list, and I'll make sure you know when I get home." But they basically focused on what would happen when they got out. And that's one of the things, that was a survival technique, I think, that kept them going.
I would be writing him news of friends and what the weather was like and things that had happened, and I wrote him every day. And he, of course, would write back and be very guarded in what he said. And but I just it was in pencil, very, very tiny writing, so he could get in as much as he could. And it was just communication. I knew he was all right, and he knew I was all right. And that's all you needed to know.
You're glad to be able to write to them and let them know that you're okay. And when you got mail, and in fact, families could send personal parcels to the POWs. They could send one parcel, they could send one cigarette parcel and one personal parcel every 3 months through the International Red Cross. And this stuff was flown into Switzerland and then distributed from Switzerland out to the POW camps.
I remember a few days before Christmas, about a week or so, I got a package. And I could have made a fortune just selling Kriegie's smells of it. Turned out to be a fruit cake liberally soaked in brandy. Well, guys didn't get much chance to smell liquor in those days. But we had it for Christmas dinner, and it was wonderful.
No mail. I never got any mail. All letters that went, they went back to my parents. Because when they went to 4B, like in that their letter, they went, and then they moved me around, and the mail wasn't too good, I guess, but some of the guys got some, but I never got any.
Well, they were elated, obviously, you know, because they used to walk at night and just, you know, talk about it, you know, and that. And then all of a sudden, they knew I was coming home, because when I was in prison camp, a scout car came in, an American scout car with a couple guys on it, and I wrote down, I took a package of Lucky Strikes, and it was green, a green package, and I wrote down, I put the address on one side. On the other side, I said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm fine, and I'll be coming home soon." And I wrapped it up into a little square like that and handed it to the guy. And you want to know that got delivered just like that. It's unbelievable.
We started out from Sagan when the Soviets were on three sides of us, and we were being bombed and strafed. And we were ordered at about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning to hit the road with only what we could carry. It was February. There was snow on the ground.
They gave us 30 minutes notice, and we got as much stuff as we could. I took a extra pair of trousers and packed the legs and threw it over my shoulder. I packed it with food because we knew it was a winter march with probably no food. So we tried to carry as much as food as possible.
We forced marched 16,000 prisoners of war out on a highway marching toward Nuremberg, 12 to below zero. It was bad. We had to stop in pottery factories, barns, to try to get warm a little bit.
If you fell out in this march, they just shot you. They didn't fool
They
you.
didn't horse around.
In other words, if you were weak or something and you just fell out, some of them they picked up and threw them on wagons, and they froze, and others they just shot.
After a day of walking like this, we finally got to a siding where, surprisingly, there was one engine and a string of boxcars left. The Luftwaffe immediately commandeered them for us, and they ordered the Germans into the front car where there were a few seats. The rest of us were being herded into the boxcars so tightly packed we couldn't sit down or lie down.
We had to sit down or lay down in shifts.
Yeah.
Otherwise you stood up. And the train was moving, and if you got to lay down, you tried to sleep a little. And then you had to stand up and let somebody else lay down.
We made it to Moosburg. Now there's over 25,000 prisoners of war in Moosburg. All, when everybody got there. It was horrible too. It didn't have all the facilities that Stalag Luft III had.
Oh, it was terrible.
Chaotic.
So you slept on the ground with 2 blankets.
I was lucky. I got into a barracks.
Well, we didn't. I slept in a tent on the ground.
I know.
And I had 2 GI blankets. And I thought that was wonderful. They were so much better than the German blanket.
The Russians took Vienna, okay, and they're continuing to move west. The commandant decided that he was not going to leave the Americans there to be taken by the Russians. We had approximately 4,500 air crew there at Stalag 17B. So his plan was to march us out of 17B. Now, they had no transportation at that time, okay? I mean, Germany was done for, period, okay? But, so we marched. We had no train, no truck, we marched from Stalag 17B to Braunau, Germany, about 500 kilometers. We left Stalag 17B on the 9th of April of 1945, and we were at Braunau the 26th of April of 1945, which is the day we decided that's it, we're not going to go any further. Well, we had a number of Germans. They were old men that were the guards. Well, when the guards came in and roused us out to pack up your stuff and you're going to go, and we said, no, we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay right here. And we knew the war was over. Okay, so essentially, so anyway, this German captain, he came in to talk to Kurt. And tell him, you're going to go or I'm going to start shooting people. And so the answer to the German captain was, and the German guards were there with him. When Kurtenbach told him, this is it, we're not going any further. And so he said, you either go or I'll start shooting. And he was told, you'll open fire because we're not going anywhere and you may kill a couple of us, but every one of you are going to die. All of you are going to die. And Kurtenbach spoke German and told the guards that's what's going to happen, okay? And this bunch of old men, they knew the war was over also. And they took one look and dropped their weapons. We picked up the weapons and we had control of the camp from then on. It was as simple as that.
Hitler gave the order that all prisoners were to be removed from the prison camp and brought inland. And so the commandant gave him the order to get everybody ready to move out the next day. And Colonel Zemke said, we ain't moving. You'll have to shoot us all. Go ahead and do what you have to do. But we're not moving, we're staying put. So the next day we woke up and the doors were all, the gates were all open and all the Germans were gone.
The Germans just
left.
The Germans just left.
They just left. And we were there all by ourselves.
General Patton, with his army, everyone was supposed to take cover because when Patton came through, the Waffen SS was the only thing that was left, and they didn't give up. And Patton knew they wouldn't, and he knew they would machine gun the camp as they came by, and they did. But we had all been warned to take cover, and anybody that was out was shot. But all of the POWs, nearly all of us, were under cover. I was in a hole.
In 10 minutes, here comes General Patton in his Jeep with his ivory handle guns on. And I was one of the first to his Jeep and got to shake hands with him in Mooseburg. And he said, you know, we knew you were here, and that's why we made a little spearhead to liberate you.
And he came through, and he stopped and gave us a good talk. Told us how proud he was of us, and marched out and rolled right on across the river.
I mean, it's as crystal clear today as it was then, watching that American flag being raised over the town of Mooseburg.
It was about 3 weeks before we got out of there, and General Doolittle was in charge of the 8th Air Force. And General Doolittle said, forget it. He says, I'm coming in and I'm getting my men out. Every B-24 and every B-17, they just did shuttle runs back and forth and plucked everybody out of the prison camp. And they flew us to Le Havre, France. And in Le Havre, France, they had set up 5 large tent cities because there were over 100,000 prisoners. And then the first thing they did was strip everybody down because we're all loaded with lice and all that, you know, and burnt the clothes, and then deloused us, and then they gave us new uniforms, and of course then fed us. And they went through a process of feeding. At first, everybody got sick. They were eating, and then so they decided that you could eat all the chicken and drink all the eggnog you wanted. They had eggnog stands all over camp, and then of course in the mess hall they had chicken, which was, I guess, easy to digest, you know, and that. And so we just waited there for ships.
It's just words I don't think can really explain it. It's just a wonderful feeling that you're home, your homeland. It's your home.
Unbelievable. The statue is still there. We're still free.
When he said, don't worry, the first group over will be the first group back. And 3 years and 15 days later, I was with my family in Denver then, and we answered the door at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's this stranger who says, I'm home. And that was the way it worked, because everything was in such a state of uproar and flux. You couldn't get a phone, you couldn't, a telegram that he'd sent saying that he was released came a week after he'd come home.
He was thin.
Was he ever? It's hardly recognizable. And the clothes just hung on him. And he had no strength. I mean, he was weak. He attempted to take us for a rowboat ride on the river in Leamington. He had such a hard time trying to row this boat, didn't he? I didn't think we'd get back to shore.
I've forgotten that.
Yeah.
But it's so good that you know that you got a bed to sleep in, and even when I got home, why I wake up in the middle of the night and I still think I was in a prison camp. And I was afraid to move. Sometimes I just roll my eyes around and I see an outline of one window and I see another window. I said, oh, I'm home.
They hadn't got over it. You see, they asked me about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Oh, I've had it. I have nightmares, still have them. But I don't let it get to me.
After we first came back, myself and all us POWs have talked about this, thousands of times. We first came back, and people would ask you, what was POW camp like? And you tell them. And they would look at you with a jaundiced eye and say, bullshit, you're making that up. Nothing like that could have ever happened. And this is a reaction we got. Okay, if you told somebody what happened, they refused to believe you. Just would not. So there was years POWs wouldn't talk. They would not. You could not get the POWs to tell people what it was like in POW camp. It just didn't happen.
And we were able to do some oral history with him and understand better what that meant in terms of his total life experience. I mean, it wasn't just for my father. It was for all of these men who went through that kind of experience. That it stayed with them for the rest of their lives. It never went away. And in some ways, their children and their friends and their families realized that. But in other ways, I don't think we realized it until they were gone. And it certainly was true of my father. And those experiences and the impact that it made on me stay with me even today.
We were all part of the same plot.
That's right.
And
we're all part of the same predicament.
In that respect, I think both of us would admit that it conditioned a lot of the rest of our lives as to how we lived and worked and knew people.
Mm-hmm.
It's an experience I'll never forget.
I think we both grew up right there.
Probably so.
And you think back, and so many times in life, the things that seemed to be the worst at the time turn out to have been the best in some way. The fact that he was gone for so long, and we were so young at the time, gave us time to grow up and to realize what was important and what wasn't. And that, to me, was the greatest gift of all, because you knew then that every day was a gift. And I knew I'd be happy no matter, as long as I knew he was somewhere alive in the world, I was happy.
And people wrote songs in POW camp. One song is known as the Kriegi Jubilee. And there are a whole bunch of verses that go in this. And then the chorus is, and I'll sing it for you. Kriegies we are and Kriegies will be till the good old U.S. Army sets us free. So don't piss and moan, just join in our song. It's a Kriegies Jubilee. That's the core, and there's a whole bunch of verses that go with it about how bad their bread was and their food and the guards and so on and so forth.
It was a different world.
Yeah.
The world is not the same today as it was then. From start to finish, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
but yeah.
so it's hard for young kids to say 65 years ago, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or you're 85 years old. You're talking to kids 15 years old, 14 years old. It's hard for them to relate,
But at the same time, these are real people.
Yeah.
And the very idea that real people were having these experiences,
mm-hmm.
and that it could have been me.
Yeah. If you were born when I was born, it would have been you.
Exactly.
It would have been you.
Yeah.
And I guarantee there would have been you. There was no way out. There was no way out of it,